Has Earth been reborn many times before us? Before we ever walked the Earth, entire worlds rose and vanished beneath forgotten suns. Continents cracked, oceans boiled, and life was forced to begin again from the ashes. From the faint breath of microbes after mass extinction to the forests reborn from volcanic ruin, Earth has rebuilt itself more times than we can imagine. Each age carried echoes of the last, a rhythm of death and renewal written in stone. But how many worlds came before ours, and what traces did they leave behind? Journey with us into Earth's long memory. The planet that died more than once. Mist rose from an ocean that no longer exists. Beneath the haze, continents drifted like half-forgotten dreams, colliding, breaking, reforming. The world has never stood still. It breathes in cataclysm creation, destruction, and rebirth braided through the bones of time. By the late Permian, the Earth was suffocating. Volcanoes tore open in what is now Siberia, exhaling fire for 2 million years. Carbon flooded the skies, seas turned anoxic, and forests burned until the ash choked the Sunday 90% of life vanished, erased in a geological blink. This was not an apocalypse by myth, it was physics, chemistry, pressure, and chance conspiring against life. Time is never kind to those who linger. Species that survive must transform or fade. After the Permian silence, life shrank into refuges, burrows, deep oceans, tiny corners of oxygen-rich water. It would take millions of years before coral reefs returned, before forests learned again how to reach toward the light. The Earth healed slowly, as though it remembered the wound. Lightning splits the sky, and we jump to another age, the Ordovician, a world of shallow seas, teeming with creatures armored in shells and spines. Then, ice comes suddenly. The oceans withdraw, temperatures collapse. Nearly everything dies again. The fossils tell it plainly. Extinction is not rare, it is rhythm. The planet resets, again and again, like a story rewriting itself. Somewhere in this endless cycle, the continents themselves conspire in death. When landmasses fuse, they strangle circulation in the oceans. Nutrients stagnate, carbon builds. When they part, volcanoes roar, and continents drown in steam. The dance of plates is not gentle, it is a slow heartbeat of ruin and renewal, sculpting eras with fire. A whisper through the strata tells of another collapse. The Devonian seas, lush with coral and fish, turned toxic from algae blooms. The oxygen fell away. Life retreated into the shadows of the deep. For 20 million years, Earth suffocated under its own abundance, a warning that even success carries the seed of its undoing. Far beneath the modern surface, black shales and ash layers mark these moments of annihilation. Each thin line is a scar, a signature of catastrophe written in mineral ink. Paleontologists read them as scripture: iridium dust, sulfur isotopes, shattered microfossils, each detail a verse in the planet's long, violent memory. Winds shift, epochs turn, the Cretaceous sky brightens with colour and sound, dragonflies, reptiles, birds, and forests vibrant with song. But beauty hides precarity. An asteroid waits in the dark, 10 kilometres wide, travelling faster than thought. When it strikes, the heat of 1 billion suns ignites the sky. Within hours, the age of giants collapses. In the ashes of the dinosaurs, a new world stirs. Mammals, once small and silent, creep into the spaces left behind. They breathe in the dust of a vanished empire and find it rich in possibility. Earth has died again, and yet, from death, the blueprint of another future unfolds. Not all resurrections are visible. Magnetic fields flip, poles wander, oceans shift their salt and warmth. Ice creeps down from the poles, then melts back to reveal green. The planet reconfigures itself like a living machine, erasing traces of its former selves. To look upon Earth is to see not continuity, but reincarnation. Silence, then the hum of a living world. Every breath we take carries atoms once burned in Permian skies, once dissolved in Cambrian seas. The air is ancient. The oceans are memory distilled into movement. The very ground beneath us has died 1,000 times, and still it endures, as if endurance itself were sacred. And yet, for all our knowledge, we are recent witnesses. We name the extinctions Ordovician, Devonian, Permian, Triassic, Cretaceous, as though labeling storms already past. But the pattern is not past. The pulse continues. We live between disasters, on a brief plateau of calm that geologic time will not sustain. At the edge of understanding, one question lingers like a scent of smoke. How many times has this planet been born anew, and how many more deaths will it take before it forgets us too? The wind carries no answer, only the soft promise of continuation that the earth, though broken, will always find a way to begin again. Somewhere beneath our feet, the answer is already written. Shadows in the strata. By the time geologists began cutting into the cliffs of Greenland and South China, they weren't chasing fossils, they were chasing ghosts. Layers of black shale and grey limestone spoke in the language of chemistry, not bone. Ratios of carbon and sulfur whispered of climates gone unstable. In the narrow margins of these rocks, the story of life's near erasure is written not in images, but in numbers. Each stratum is a memory pressed into silence. A sudden spike of iridium marks a meteor's impact. A collapse in carbon-13 tells of dying forests. Tiny glass spherules, fused by unimaginable heat, settle like punctuation marks between worlds. To those who read them, these patterns are evidence that the Earth's stability is an illusion, that catastrophe is the planet's native dialect. A hammer strikes the outcrop. The sound is crisp, clinical. Every fragment that falls from the stone releases a page of prehistory. Scientists measure thickness, color, and grain. They trace magnetic polarity flips, count microfossils, and extract trapped gases. Beneath microscopes, they see extinction as data, a curve on a graph, a pulse gone flat. Not all clues are violent. Some arrive as absences, a missing layer, an abrupt silence in the fossil record. At the boundary between the Permian and Triassic, for instance, limestone gives way to clay, coral to dust. The change spans mere centimeters, yet it represents millions of years swallowed whole. In that slender band lies proof of the world's most complete undoing. Chemical residues tell the sequence. Volcanic eruptions poisoned the air, acidified the seas, stripped the ozone. Oxygen levels fell by half. Organisms gasped, mutated, failed. The data show not a single disaster, but a chain reaction. Earth spiraling through feedback loops of fire and suffocation. Catastrophe wasn't an instant, it was a process, slow and precise as arithmetic. The field notebooks describe it without sentiment. Layer 45, pyritic nodules, high mercury concentration. Layer 46, complete absence of bioturbation. Layer 47, evidence of euxinia. Each note is a death certificate, but between the lines, a pattern emerges, cycles of collapse and recovery, spaced with unnerving regularity. Some researchers whisper about periodicity. Roughly every 26 to 30 million years, the fossil record tightens into a point of crisis. They argue over causes: comet showers, mantle plumes, cosmic radiation, but the repetition feels almost deliberate. If true, extinction is not an accident, it is pulse. The Earth itself beats in destruction. Beneath Antarctic ice cores, other stories unfold. Bubbles of ancient air, trapped for hundreds of millennia, reveal sudden surges in carbon dioxide, spikes that mirror those found in prehistoric rock. The data align climate volatility, mass death, renewal. The past bleeds into the present, uncomfortably familiar. Even the ocean floor participates in this investigation. Sediment cores pulled from abyssal plains show rhythmic bands of darkness, high carbon, low oxygen, matching events millions of years apart. Each layer is a photograph of suffocation. It's as though the sea itself remembers every breath it ever lost. From laboratory benches to wind-torn cliffs, scientists assemble fragments of disaster into a narrative. Their tools are lasers and spectrometers. Their metaphors are measured in isotopes. Yet what they uncover feels almost spiritual, a planet that archives its own trauma in mineral code, as if afraid to forget. The deeper they dig, the more haunting the symmetry becomes. A rise in carbon, a fall in diversity, a slow climb back to abundance, then collapse again. Each cycle refines life, narrowing what can endure. It is evolution through devastation, progress written in extinction's shadow. Somewhere between disbelief and reverence, the realization settles. These rocks are not just evidence, they are witnesses. They have seen oceans vanish, continents burn, and atmospheres suffocate. Every layer that survives is a confession of what did not. And still, the story remains incomplete. There are gaps no drill can reach, intervals erased by erosion or subduction. For every extinction we know, others may lie buried deeper, their signals folded beyond memory. The planet hides its oldest scars beneath new skin. Perhaps that is why the scientists keep returning to the cliffs, not merely to decode the past, but to anticipate the next inflection in the pattern. The stones are not silent. We have simply not yet learned the rhythm of their warning. Somewhere below our feet, the next boundary layer is already forming thin, invisible, waiting for its turn to speak. The first great forgetting. Long before those boundary layers were measured or named, one of them was being born. Wind howled across a frozen equator. The seas, once green and teeming, had turned to mirrors of glass. Mountains vanished beneath white, the horizon itself dissolved. For millions of years, the planet lay still beneath an armor of ice, a silence so complete it seemed even memory had frozen. It began quietly. Volcanic whispers released carbon into the air, but weathering drew it down faster than the world could replenish it. The sun was weaker then, its warmth meager. With each passing century, snow crept farther toward the tropics. Clouds thickened, reflecting the last fragments of sunlight back into the void. The descent into cold was not sudden, it was betrayal by degrees. Creatures clung to what little warmth remained. Microbes gathered at volcanic vents, feeding on sulfur in the darkness. Beneath the ice, thin films of water persisted, a secret refuge. Every breath of heat became sacred. For these survivors, time slowed to the pulse of chemical reactions, the faintest rhythms of endurance beneath a dead sky. Sound faded from the surface. No waves broke, no storms raged, no rivers sang through valleys. Only the creak of moving glaciers marked the passage of time. Continents inched together, drawn by the grinding weight above them. The atmosphere thinned, oxygen fell, and the planet's once vivid face became pale and unrecognizable. In the depths, life wrote itself smaller. DNA adapted to cold, to darkness, to isolation. Mutations favored patience, not speed. It was evolution reduced to a whisper, the world rehearsing extinction while quietly composing the blueprints for its return. There are traces of this age still buried in the rocks. Iron formations turned banded with rust, marking oceans deprived of oxygen. Layers of dropstones, pebbles carried by glaciers, now rest in what were once tropical seas. These relics are not just geological oddities, they are the handwriting of catastrophe. Each fragment tells us that the Earth has already known total stillness and chosen to move again. At the height of this global freeze, the ice stretched from pole to pole. Temperatures plunged below anything modern life could imagine. The moonlight glinted off continents that had become one continuous desert of frost. Yet beneath that frozen shroud, volcanic fires still burned. Magma rose through fractures in the crust, exhaling carbon dioxide that slowly, imperceptibly, began to thicken the air. Centuries passed like breaths in stone. Each eruption laid another thin layer of gas between the planet and the abyss. Greenhouse warmth built quietly until the balance tipped. The great thaw began not with violence, but with release, oceans cracking open, continents steaming, rain falling after 10 million years of silence. The world exhaled, and with that breath came resurrection. The melt was furious and uneven. Rivers tore across landscapes that hadn't seen liquid water in eons. Glacial walls collapsed in thunderous avalanches. Continents groaned under the weight of change. In the chaos, new minerals formed, new coastlines appeared, and new possibilities emerged. The first green returned microbial mats on wet stone, hesitant yet determined. For those first organisms, sunlight was rediscovered. Photosynthesis reawakened, painting the seas with color. Oxygen seeped back into the atmosphere. The earth was no longer white, it shimmered again with life's palette, fragile but certain. It was not the same world as before. It was an entirely new experiment in being alive. Somewhere within this rebirth lies a lesson that endures. The planet does not simply recover, it transforms. Extinction and renewal are not opposites, they are phases of the same heartbeat. The ice ages cleanse, but they also create. Without this frozen interlude, the Cambrian explosion, the grand awakening of complex life, might never have come. And yet, in that deep time, no witness remained to remember what was lost. The glaciers melted, the scars eroded, and the silence was forgotten. This was the Earth's first great amnesia, its first self-erasure. Life began again, as if nothing had ever come before. Even now, fragments of that forgotten world lie hidden in the oldest rocks, their chemistry whispering of ancient cold. To hold one is to touch the memory of a planet that once froze itself to the edge of oblivion and somehow thawed back into light. Cambrian dawn, the world's first renaissance. Light returned first as a shimmer. After eons of blue ice and silence, sunlight struck open seas once more. The oceans, freed from their prison, breathed out mist and sound a low planetary sigh. Where glaciers had retreated, warmth unfurled, and in that fragile warmth, life found permission to bloom. By the Cambrian, the earth had learned colour. Pigments, once hidden in microbial mats, burst across shallow waters. Reds, greens, and golds shimmered beneath the waves like spilled light. Trilobites scuttled over seafloor plains. Worm, like creatures tunneled in the mud, sculpting the first true ecosystems. The silence of Snowball Earth was over the planet, had begun to sing again. The fossils tell of innovation at breakneck speed. Exoskeletons hardened, eyes evolved, muscles coordinated in new forms of motion. Each lineage experimented swimming, crawling, predation. It was as if the planet, having survived its long sleep, awoke with boundless imagination. In a geological instant, complexity became contagious. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion, though it was not an explosion of destruction. It was an outburst of possibility. Over roughly 20 million years, almost every major animal body plan appeared. Arthropods, mollusks, and chordates, the ancestors of nearly all future life, traced their lineage to this creative storm. What ice had erased, evolution repainted in motion and light. Shallow seas became theatres of invention. Organisms developed armour and weaponry. Eyes that could see predators coming, limbs that could dig or strike or swim. The arms race began, not from malice, but from abundance. For the first time, life competed within an ecosystem rich enough to sustain rivalry, a kind of biological renaissance, where art and survival were the same craft. Sediment beds, in China's Chengjiang and Canada's Burgess Shale, preserve this moment in exquisite detail. Whole creatures fossilized mid-motion soft tissues, gills, and even nerve cords imprinted in stone. These are portraits of awakening, animals with new senses, responding to light, current, vibration. The seas must have been luminous with movement. Not all survived the experiment. For every form that flourished, countless others vanished. Some designs were too fragile, too strange, yet even the failures shaped the future. Evolution, during this age, was exuberant, reckless, creative, unafraid. It was the planet's first art, sculpted from mutation and chance. The chemistry of the oceans supported this bloom. Oxygen levels rose dramatically after the Great Thaw, allowing metabolism to surge. Calcium, leached from retreating glaciers, provided the raw material for shells and skeletons. Life armored itself from the very bones of the planet, a collaboration between rock and flesh. On the seafloor, the landscape itself had changed. Microbial mats once sealed the sediments, but now creatures dug and stirred the mud, oxygenating it. The Earth's surface was no longer static, it moved with the pulse of its inhabitants. The biosphere and geology were entwined, each reshaping the other. Imagine it warm, shallow seas lit by pale suns, filled with drifting clouds of plankton and forests of sponge-like forms. Colours that no eye had yet named shimmered through the water. Movement itself became the planet's new language. Every ripple, every flicker of fin or claw, a declaration, we are here again. The Cambrian world was both alien and familiar. Its seas held no fish, no plants, no vertebrates beyond simple ancestors, yet the choreography of life already felt inevitable. Evolution had discovered the grammar of form. The universe, through this tiny planet, had learned to sculpt beauty. In this flourishing, the memory of the frozen ages lingered only as potential, a warning etched into DNA. Life, once nearly erased, has now learned resilience through diversity. Redundancy became its survival strategy. Not one path forward, but millions. From catastrophe came creativity. From death, design. To walk a shoreline today is to trace the echo of that renaissance. Every motion of fin, feather, or limb is a continuation of Cambrian experiments still unfolding. The architecture of eyes, the rhythm of hearts, the symmetry of bodies, all are signatures born in those first seas of colour. Though the world would burn and drown many times again, this moment marked a turning point. The Earth had not just survived, it had invented itself anew. The long forgetting had ended. Memory returned not as recollection, but as creation. Beneath the same sun that once thawed its prisons of ice, the planet dreamed forward, alive with the brilliance of beginning. Fire beneath the oceans. Life flourished above, but beneath the sea floor, the planet still burned. Vast plumes of molten rock rose from the mantle, tearing open the crust in slow, inexorable pulses. The Cambrian seas, radiant with new creatures, floated atop a restive giant. The world's first renaissance, it seemed, was built on fire. At the edges of the newborn continents, magma erupted through fissures, meeting water in violent bursts of steam and mineral rain. These undersea volcanoes did not merely shape the planet, they shaped life. Here, in these fiery mid-ocean crucibles, the chemistry of existence was rewritten daily. Iron, sulfur, and carbon collided in unseen reactions that fed both stone and cell. The seafloor expanded and collapsed in endless motion. The crust, thin and brittle, cracked like cooling glass. Beneath it, the mantle convulsed, sending slow surges of molten rock through spreading ridges thousands of kilometers long. To understand Earth's rebirths, one must first listen to this pulse, the silent tectonic heartbeat that has never stopped. Where magma met water, life found its paradoxical refuge. Hydrothermal vents, black smokers and white smokers, poured out metallic elixirs, shimmering plumes of iron and sulfur that stained the abyssal dark. Primitive microbes gathered there, clinging to the mineral towers, like pilgrims around sacred fire. They needed no sunlight and drew sustenance from chemistry, coaxing energy from reactions that would poison most other forms of life. In these dark forges, heat was not a threat, it was currency. Even as the Cambrian explosion painted the surface oceans with wonder trilobites, sponges, early mollusks, the deep realms practiced endurance. This was not the evolution of form, but of strategy. They adapted to scarcity, to acidity, to change. Their success would echo far beyond their time. When the next extinction came, their descendants would be among the few to survive. It was as if the planet itself had trained them for calamity. Whole ecosystems vanished overnight, entombed in cooling basalt, yet every destruction cleared the way for new beginnings. In this relentless cycle of loss and renewal, evolution found its tutor. DNA itself became opportunistic, experimenting, repairing, rewriting. Catastrophe was no longer an interruption, but a mechanism. Life began to expect disaster, and in doing so, it became indestructible. The vents were also Earth's chemical lungs. They exhaled gases carbon dioxide, methane, and hydrogen sulfide that would eventually mingle with the upper atmosphere. The boundary between geology and biology blurred. The fire beneath the oceans was not merely geological violence, it was biochemical artistry, sculpting the conditions for complexity. Above, continents drifted like patient rafts, moved by the slow churn of heat below. Their collisions raised mountains and closed seas. Their separations created new rifts. What we call Earth's history was, and still is, the expression of this hidden fire. Even the breathable air and stable oceans we inherit owe their balance to that ceaseless exchange between magma and water, pressure and release. Deep within the mantle, colossal convection cells, hotter than any surface flame, rolled like liquid continents. They carried not just heat, but time. Every upwelling of magma marked a new beginning. Every subducted plate carried the record of what came before. If the Earth had a memory, it was written here, not in fossils or sediments, but in the circulation of its molten heart. For all its violence, this was not chaos. It was a conversation, with fire speaking and water replying. The result was not destruction, but equilibrium, a planet that could destroy itself and remain whole. Life, observing from the edges of vents, was learning the same principal survival through feedback, existence through adaptation. The Cambrian seas above glittered with form, with colour, with new anatomies exploring the bounds of possibility. But beneath them, in the unlit realms, another kind of creativity burned slower, quieter, but far more enduring. So, while the sunlight world danced in its first bloom of diversity, the underworld hummed a deeper song, a song of balance through fire. The two worlds, luminous and molten, were not rivals, but partners in creation. Together, they defined a truth older than life itself. Every renewal is born from what burns beneath it. The fire did not end, it pulsed beneath the crust, dreaming of the next upheaval that would change everything once again. The great dying. It began as a whisper, a subtle shift in the air, and a tremor beneath the sea. The world that had survived 1 billion years of fire began to unravel, not with a single cataclysm, but with the slow suffocation of its own breath. Beneath the waves, the vents still exhaled their heat, but something in the balance faltered. The chemistry that once fed life began to poison it. The Permian world had been magnificent. Forests of giant ferns stretched across Pangaea, and the seas shimmered with trilobites, ammonites, and reefs so vast they rivaled continents. Life had mastered complexity. It had learned endurance, expansion, and beauty. But evolution does not guarantee safety. It guarantees only change. The first signs came quietly. Oceans turning sour, skies thickening with unseen gas. Volcanic fissures in what is now Siberia began to open, releasing vast floods of basalt and a storm of carbon dioxide that wrapped the planet in heat. For millions of years the Earth's surface cracked and bled fire. Rivers of molten rock buried forests and evaporated seas, while sulfuric clouds blotted out the Sunday daylight dimmed to an amber haze. The rain turned acidic. The temperature rose by degrees that meant nothing to a moment, but everything to an age. Oxygen in the oceans fell until even fish gasped and died. Coral reefs dissolved, plankton collapsed. The seas stagnated and blackened, releasing methane that suffocated the air. It was not a single extinction, but a sequence, each collapse feeding the next. What began in magma ended in silence. On land, trees withered from the roots upward. Great insects, once rulers of the carboniferous skies, vanished. Amphibians retreated to shrinking pools that soon dried to dust. Reptiles wandered through heat, so oppressive it warped their eggs before they could hatch. The chain of life stretched thin and then broke. In that silence, the world remembered what it meant to begin again. Over 90% of species have disappeared. Coral, trilobite, ammonite, all gone. It was as if the planet had decided to clear its memory, to wipe the board clean and start anew. What fire could not consume, time buried beneath layers of ash and clay. Even the air lost its rhythm, the winds stilling over a world that no longer pulsed with breath. Beneath the devastation, the deep earth still moved. The mantle churned, restless, patient. The very same fires that had once sustained life through hydrothermal vents now undid it through excess. The covenant between fire and water had been broken, yet within that breaking lay renewal. For in the thickening darkness, bacteria endured. Tiny, unseen, they processed the toxins that larger creatures could not, turning poison into possibility. They waited for the storm to pass. When it did, the silence was not empty, it was fertile. The air cleared slowly, over millions of years. The seas cooled and regained oxygen. What returned was not the same. From the survivors, the burrowers, the scavengers, the small and unassuming evolution began again. They carried within them the memory of collapse, and with it, a new intelligence written into their DNA, the knowledge that endurance alone was not enough. To persist, life had to transform. The great dying did not end with loss. It ended with transformation. It was the planet's brutal recalibration, its way of reminding creation that every paradise carries the seed of its own undoing. The earth had burned, drowned, and suffocated, yet it remained alive. The fires of Siberia faded into basalt plateaus, their scars hidden beneath moss and frost. The oceans, once black with decay, shimmered blue once more. And somewhere in that recovering world, the first ancestors of the dinosaurs began to walk. They stepped into a landscape emptied of giants, into a silence heavy with memory. The earth had changed its cast, but kept its stage, its oceans and skies ready for the next experiment. Extinction, it seemed, was not the end of life's story, but the punctuation between its chapters. The planet turned, unhurried. The vents beneath the oceans cooled, and new ones opened elsewhere. The world inhaled again, softly, as if waking from a fever dream. And in that breath, the long march toward the next age began, cautious, fragile, yet inevitable. The silence after the storm, the world exhaled, and for the first time in millions of years, the air no longer shimmered with ash or the heat of volcanic breath. The planet, scarred and subdued, entered a long and fragile quiet. Seas lay still beneath a pale sky. Mountains, once molten and alive, cooled into silence. It was not peace in the human sense, but the uneasy calm that follows exhaustion. The earth had survived its fever, though its pulse was faint. The land stretched vast and empty. Forests that once rippled with the motion of ancient ferns now stood as petrified monuments. The rivers ran brown with the silt of a vanished world. No birds sang, for there were no birds yet to sing. Across plains of cracked clay, the wind carried the memory of life rather than its presence. Even the insects, those tireless colonists of creation, had fallen silent. For a time, the earth seemed to have forgotten how to move, yet within the quiet, change was beginning. The oceans, stripped of oxygen and clouded by death, began their slow recovery. Deep currents stirred again, circulating nutrients long locked in decay. In the dark water, microscopic survivors, bacteria, algae, and small foraging plankton tested the new chemistry. Their fragile cycles of growth marked the first pulse of renewal. It was invisible, almost imperceptible, but it was movement nonetheless. On land, the first green returned not in forests, but in small, stubborn patches. Mosses crept across the damp edges of rock. Lichens spread like faint watercolor stains upon the basalt. These were not the grand empires of vegetation that had once covered the continents, but the first whispers of recovery. They softened the land, held the soil, and invited moisture back into the atmosphere. With every spore and filament, the planet began to breathe again. Time moved differently in this age. Millions of years passed without witness, without spectacle. Life rebuilt itself molecule by molecule, season by season, guided by patterns too patient for violence. The seas grew lighter in color as photosynthesis took hold once more. The sky brightened, no longer cloaked in carbon and haze. What had once been an inferno slowly became blue again. In that renewed light, evolution stirred from dormancy. The survivors of the great dying were few, but their scarcity bred innovation. Reptiles, once peripheral, now had room to expand. They learned to walk with new confidence, their limbs stronger, their lungs better suited for the thin air. In the rivers, new species of fish experimented with armor, jaws, and fins. The emptiness became an invitation, and nature filled it with possibility. But this was not an age of grandeur. It was an age of endurance. Every creature that reappeared carried the memory of collapse within its bones. They lived cautiously, testing the limits of the fragile equilibrium. The earth itself seemed to move carefully, its storms mild, its climates hesitant, as if aware that excess could break the balance again. Stability, it appeared, was not the natural state of worlds, but a rare and temporary kindness. The silence after the storm was not void, but preparation. Beneath the stillness, the planet was composing again, resetting its rhythms, rebalancing its temperatures, recalibrating the delicate equations of air and sea. The continents shifted imperceptibly, their margins grinding against one another in the slow anticipation of future mountains. From above, if one could have watched, Earth would have seemed peaceful. But deep inside, the same old fire smouldered quietly, waiting for its next role in creation. Over epochs, green deepened into forest once more. Rivers carved new paths across cooling stone. The air thickened with oxygen, feeding the lungs of larger and braver creatures. The silence receded, replaced by the low murmur of a reawakening world. Each sunrise arrived a fraction brighter, each tide a little stronger. The planet was remembering how to live. Paradoxically, renewal carried with it the faint echo of sorrow. The fossils entombed in the rock were not merely remnants of extinction, they were lessons written in calcium. They told of cycles, of fragility, of how easily abundance can vanish. The earth did not mourn, for it did not need to, but its surface bore the memory of everything it had lost, and that memory shaped all that came after. When life finally rose again to fill the silence, it did so with new forms creatures that would one day give rise to the age of reptiles and forests, of towering conifers. From the quiet, a different world was emerging, leaner, more adaptive, aware in some wordless way of how close it had come to ending. As the first waves of wind brushed across the regrown plains, the planet's long stillness broke. The storm had passed, but its echo remained a low hum beneath the rhythm of renewal, reminding creation that peace is never permanent, only borrowed between catastrophes. Rebuilding Eden, the quiet, after extinction, did not last long. Beneath the ashes of the Permian, the world began to stir once more. The oceans, emptied and still, warmed with new chemistry. Rivers carved through the barren landscapes, washing minerals from the broken mountains, feeding the first stubborn roots that dared to return. Forests returned first, not the towering jungles of the Carboniferous, but modest pioneers' ferns, seed plants, and ginkgos rising through the ruin. Each leaf was an act of defiance, a green signal that the planet still possessed its will to recover. Beneath these early canopies, insects crawled again, their wings tracing the air like forgotten hymns. From the seas, new creatures emerged to fill the empty spaces. Ammonites spiraled into the open blue, their shells glinting like coiled suns. Coral reefs, though once shattered, began to rebuild upon the bones of their ancestors. It was not a simple restoration, it was a reimagining. The ecosystems that rose in the Triassic were leaner, more experimental, shaped by the pressures of survival rather than abundance. Volcanoes still burned across the landscape, yet their fire no longer brought annihilation, it brought foundation. Basaltic plains cooled into fertile stone. Minerals leached into the seas, sparking blooms of algae that fed entire food chains. In this crucible, evolution accelerated. Reptiles diversified into new forms, from small, agile hunters to creatures that would one day rule the skies and the land. It was as though life, having brushed against oblivion, now evolved with renewed urgency, aware of how brief survival could be. Across the continents of Pangaea, new rhythms emerged. The climate, once wildly unstable, began to settle into patterns that favored growth. The first conifers climbed mountain slopes, their roots holding the earth together. Rivers braided through these young forests, teeming with amphibians and small reptiles. From this living mosaic, a sense of continuity returned, not a resurrection of what was lost, but the forging of something unprecedented. Amid this resurgence, the balance of power shifted. Where the past had belonged to ancient amphibians and massive insects, the Triassic belonged to the reptiles. They became the architects of a new age. Some crept across riverbanks, others soared above the forests. The lineage that would one day give rise to dinosaurs began its long ascent, small and unassuming at first. The planet, still trembling from its wounds, nurtured the seeds of giants. The air itself changed. Oxygen levels rose, and with them came vitality. Plants grew taller, animals more complex. The biosphere, though fragile, began to weave a new stability. Every reborn forest absorbed the memory of the carbon-choked skies that had once suffocated the world. Every reef carried within it the silent record of extinction and rebirth. Earth had learned to breathe again, and in that breath was both resilience and restraint. The planet's face, too, transformed. Deserts shrank, rain returned. The continents of Pangaea shifted imperceptibly, cracking along fault lines that would one day scatter them apart. Beneath the surface, the molten heart of Earth kept reshaping the stage, ensuring that nothing, no empire of species, no age of abundance, would last forever. Yet for a time, it felt as though creation itself had triumphed over memory. Fossilized soils from this era revealed traces of roots intertwined with ash, seeds fossilized beside the bones of small creatures. Each layer of sediment tells the story of persistence. The Earth, through cycles of death and renewal, had begun its next great experiment in complexity. It was not Eden. As it once was, it was an Eden reborn through fire, tempered by loss and wiser in its balance. And somewhere in this vast reconstruction, in the quiet between survival and innovation, the stage was being set again. The air grew richer, the forests denser, and the seas alive with new forms. Out of this living recovery, the seeds of future empires waited unseen beneath the canopy. The next age was not yet visible, but its foundations were already alive, breathing and growing beneath the renewed light of the Sunday. The world had learned to rebuild itself. In the quiet aftermath, new life crept where none should have survived. But in rebuilding, it had also learned to change to never again return to what it had been. When giants ruled the sunlight, after millions of years of darkness, sunlight spilled without obstruction across a thriving earth. Forests climbed the continents in vast emerald waves. Ferns, conifers, and towering cycads reached skyward, drinking the warmth that poured through a rejuvenated atmosphere. Rivers braided through green plains where amphibians stirred, and insects, newly monstrous, took to the air with wings that glittered like molten glass. The silence that once haunted the world had been replaced by a chorus of life, a planet no longer healing but exultant. The seas, too, pulsed with new ambition. Coral cities spread beneath the waves, and the bones of vanished worlds became foundations for something greater. Fish evolved armor and speed. Predators honed new forms of pursuit. Every tide carried innovation. Every current whispered of change. Life, once humbled, now tested the limits of what it could become. It began slowly, with the small and the quiet. But soon the air trembled with footsteps heavier than thunder. In the warmth of the Triassic dawn, reptiles emerged first as shadows along the rivers, then as rulers of the open lands. They stretched long necks toward the sun, scales shimmering with the colors of ancient minerals. Each breath they drew was a declaration that the earth had entered an age of power, an era defined not by survival, but by conquest. The world itself seemed to expand in response. Continents drifted apart, pulling the old supercontinent into pieces. Volcanoes breathed clouds into the sky, feeding the air with carbon and fire. Seasons deepened, jungles spread across equatorial lands, while deserts bloomed beneath unrelenting light. It was an age that rewarded strength and adaptability. In the sunlight, everything grew larger, not merely in size, but in ambition. By the middle of this age, giants walked openly beneath the sky. Herbivores grazed in herds that moved like living continents, their shadows rolling across fern plains. Carnivores followed, lean and alert, their gaze sharpened by the promise of motion. Above them, the first flyers traced paths of gold through the air, turning the heavens into another kingdom to rule. The planet had entered a rhythm of creation and hunger, and the balance between them shaped every living form. With each passing dawn, the sun worked patiently, sculpting the planet back into balance. Its heat determined what lived and what vanished. In its glow, metabolism quickened, muscles lengthened, hearts grew vast enough to pump through bodies the size of towers. Where once the earth had known only quiet endurance, it now pulsed with energy, a fever of existence that could be seen from the swaying of trees to the beating of wings. But for all its splendor, this was not a tranquil world. Beneath the canopy of green, competition was relentless. Predator and prey evolved in tandem, each new adaptation met by another. Teeth sharpened as armor thickened. Speed met with stealth. It was a world balanced on tension, where life was both brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Out in the vast seas, the drama continued. Marine reptiles, shaping the oceans into realms of precise, relentless power. Their sleek bodies sliced through the water, their eyes wide and unblinking, as they pursued schools of glittering prey. Plankton thrived, oxygen flooded the world, and the balance between light and darkness became the rhythm of survival. Every creature, from the smallest ammonite to the largest ichthyosaur, lived as part of a vast, interwoven story of growth. In this golden epoch, Earth was alive in ways it had never been before. Forests echoed with the calls of creatures unseen by any later age. The planet had become an orchestra of sound and motion, a testament to what abundance could create. Yet even amid the majesty, there lingered a familiar truth that the same forces which gave life its brilliance also carried within them the seeds of its undoing. At this point, the giants stood at the height of their reign, unchallenged across the continents. They stood as the architects of a living empire, shaped by light and nourished by fire. Every heartbeat in the forest, every wave upon the shore, bore the signature of a world reborn into strength. The earth, once fractured and fragile, now pulsed with vitality beneath the open Sunday. It was not the same planet that had risen from the ashes. It was something fiercer, more certain of its place in the cosmos. And as the sunlight touched every scale, leaf, and wing, it seemed, for a moment, that life itself had mastered the art of permanence, unaware that time would test it again. The day the sky fell, the world had reached its height. Forests stretched from horizon to horizon, and the thunder of colossal footsteps echoed through a living paradise. Then, one day, a streak of light appeared above the sea. It crossed the blue in utter silence, a single brilliance cutting through calm air. For a few seconds the earth held its breath. Then the light met the planet, and the sky itself broke open. The impact was not a sound, but an event. Oceans heaved upward, forests ignited before the shockwave even reached them. Mountains quivered like fabric, and the air turned white-hot. Trees, once symbols of endurance, folded into ash within moments. Across continents, creatures lifted their heads to a sound they could not comprehend, the last sound many would ever hear. Dust rose in waves that circled the world. Every particle carried the memory of what had been destroyed. The air grew dim, day became a bruised twilight. Firestorms raged through the night, carried by winds so fierce they stripped the land bare. Rivers boiled, rain turned acidic, and life that had ruled with such certainty now fled in confusion through a landscape no longer recognizable. In the marine realm, devastation lagged, reaching the oceans only after the land had fallen silent. Waves surged hundreds of meters high, scouring coastlines and dragging forests into the deep. Coral reefs, once alive with color, vanished beneath clouds of soot. Even far from the crater, the sea darkened, its temperature plummeting as sunlight disappeared behind curtains of dust. Creatures that had survived 1,000 generations found themselves without light, without warmth, without the rhythm that had guided their lives. The days that followed were filled with silence. The great reptiles, so long the architects of life, stumbled through choking ash. Many died where they stood, their bodies preserved in the very soil that would one day tell their story. The air grew colder with each passing dawn, until dawn itself became meaningless. Ice crept across the land, and the breath of the survivors came in faint clouds of frost. Above, the sun was gone, and the atmosphere had turned into a vast shroud, reflecting the light it once welcomed. For years, perhaps decades, the earth slept in dim half-light. Plants withered, ecosystems collapsed layer by layer. The abundance that had once filled the world was replaced by scarcity, and the intricate web of life unraveled strand by strand. Though destruction reigned, endurance was never fully erased. Small mammals, those quiet scavengers of the undergrowth, found refuge in burrows and caves. Seeds lay dormant beneath the frost, waiting for a warmth that would return someday. The oceans, though wounded, held pockets of stability where plankton drifted on, unseen but alive. It was in these hidden corners that the future hid itself, clinging to existence as the planet mourned. The crater, once molten, cooled into stone, its surface sealed with the memory of ruin. Around it stretched a wasteland of glass and carbon, a monument to impact. The air carried a metallic taste, and rain hissed when it touched the ground. For generations, no forest would rise there, no river would run clear. Yet time, patient and impartial, began its slow work again. Winds softened the edges of devastation. Rain filled the crater's wounds. Life, reduced to its smallest forms, began to test the soil once more. The age of giants was gone, extinguished not by weakness, but by chance. The earth had been struck from outside, its course altered by a single moment of violence. In the aftermath, no creature could have known what would come next. But beneath the shadow of extinction, the smallest survivors began to stir. From the silence, new voices would emerge, not of thunder and scale, but of adaptation and thought. Once the sky itself had fallen, and still the world refused to die. It had learned again that life could be erased and still return. The sunlight that once fed the giants would someday shine upon creatures unlike any that had come before. For now, the land remained grey and empty, haunted by echoes of wings and footsteps. But within the dust, the seeds of the future waited silent, unseen, and ready for the next dawn. The mammals whisper. In the silence that followed the catastrophe, the earth did not roar back to life. It stirred. Beneath the ash and fractured canopy, in burrows untouched by flame, tiny hearts began to beat again. They belonged to creatures small enough to vanish between stones, light enough to escape the weight of ruin. The age of giants had ended, and in the quiet, something more delicate began to take hold, an age not of power, but of persistence. The survivors were not magnificent. They were soft-bodied, warm-blooded, and cautious descendants of the overlooked. Now, their obscurity had become their strength. In a world without shadows of titans, the small could move freely, filling the empty spaces left behind. The extinction that silenced the thunder lizards had opened 1,000 quiet doors. Forests, once vast and green, grew thin and fragmented, shaped by new climates. In this mosaic of shifting ecosystems, mammals adapted with a kind of ingenuity unseen before. They grew sharper senses, quicker reflexes, and the ability to regulate warmth, a mastery of internal fire that separated them from the cold-blooded relics of the past. This inner heat became their secret inheritance, allowing them to thrive in night and frost, in the new unpredictability of the post-cataclysmic earth. Volcanoes ceased their coughing. Rivers cut new paths through the layers of fallen worlds. Life diversified again, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence. Mammals took to trees, to plains, to water. Some grew long limbs to leap between branches. Others developed teeth suited for crushing seeds or flesh. Diversity became their armor. No single form ruled, and so no single disaster could end them all. In this age of subtle beginnings, evolution worked quietly but relentlessly. The first placentals carried their young within, nurturing life in hidden safety before its first breath. This small innovation would transform survival itself, the bond between parent and offspring, becoming a shield against chaos. Each generation refined the blueprint, creating creatures with greater intelligence, coordination, and care. Life was no longer about endurance alone. It was about memory, adaptation, and foresight. Predators returned, though never again in the same colossal forms. They were smaller, now fox-sized hunters that moved with speed rather than strength. Prey learned to sense their approach, to communicate danger through scent and sound. Social bonds began to form, and with them the first flickers of cooperation. A whisper of something deeper was beginning to echo through the living world, the earliest glimmers of awareness. In rebuilding itself, life learned cooperation. Forests, flowers, insects, and mammals bound by shared endurance. Pollination, dispersal, and predation all became threads in a widening web of life. The mammals thrived in their complexity. their curiosity drawing them into every niche, every possibility. Theirs was a quieter conquest, measured not in dominance, but in endurance. From this quiet ascendance came lineages that would reshape the Earth story once more. Tiny primates began to appear, their grasping hands exploring branches and fruit. Hoofed mammals grazed in the open plains that replaced the ancient forests. Early whales slipped into the oceans, trading gravity for buoyancy, their ancestors' limbs transformed into flippers. Each step forward was guided not by might, but by adaptability, an unspoken dialogue between life and a world forever changed. Though mammals began to flourish, the scars of extinction still marked the planet's surface. The layer of iridium that marked the end of one world remained buried beneath their feet, a silent record of destruction and renewal. In every heartbeat and breath, there was a trace of that ancient loss, a reminder that survival was never guaranteed, only earned through change. The crater that had once glowed with molten fury now slept beneath forest and tide. Around its rim, life had returned, tentative but persistent. Roots split the cooling stone, and ferns crept over its edges. In the air, the descendants of those who once hid in burrows now moved with confidence, their warmth a defiance against the cold vastness of fate. In the wake of catastrophe, the planet rebuilt itself, altered by survival, never to return to what it had been. And from that change came the whisper that would one day speak not in instinct, but in thought. The whisper of mammals, still soft, still unseen, yet carrying the promise of everything that would follow, fire and memory. In the dim glow of prehistory, something remarkable stirred within the mammals who had survived catastrophe. Within their small, curious eyes, light gathered not just the reflection of the sun or the moon, but a dawning awareness. Thought began to stretch beyond reaction. It began to remember. From root to canopy, the forests had returned, weaving green across continents once charred by extinction. In the undergrowth, creatures with sharp senses and sharper minds learned to move through shadow and light with purpose. Each generation carried more than the one before, not just the strength of muscle or the precision of tooth and claw, but lessons carved invisibly into their minds. Memory had entered evolution as a new kind of inheritance. Some took to the trees, learning the language of balance and grip. Others dug into the earth, trusting in the patience of darkness. And on open plains, early primates began to watch the sky with eyes that no longer saw only predators or weather, but patterns, the turning of days, the pulse of time. Awareness was becoming architecture, built layer by layer across the generations. The earth, too, was finding balance. Volcanic heat still whispered through cracks in the crust, but it no longer ruled with destruction. Fire became a quiet presence, shaping ecosystems, clearing forests, and renewing soil, a rhythm life itself was learning to master. And as the planet learned renewal, so did its inhabitants. Among these creatures were ancestors of great intelligence, small, social mammals, who learned not only to survive, but to teach. They began to share learned behaviors, to pass knowledge through imitation and sound. The first sparks of culture, however faint, flickered in this exchange. Each memory transferred from one generation to another became a step away from instinct and towards something entirely new. The Eocene world bloomed into complexity, with vast rainforests stretching across continents and life experimenting with countless forms. Whales returned to the oceans their ancestors had left behind. Hoofed grazers spread across grasslands that shimmered beneath a warming Sunday. In the treetops, primates developed grasping hands and forward-facing eyes, instruments not just of survival, but of curiosity. It became the thread that tied experience to identity, allowing creatures to act not only by reflex, but by recall. In memory's depths lay the seeds of emotion, the recognition of danger, the anticipation of comfort. Life was learning the subtleties of time, that the past could guide the present, and that choices could shape the future. Evolution now had an ally more powerful than adaptation alone. It had memory, the ability to learn faster than the body could change. A creature that could remember did not need to wait for the slow sculpting of mutation. It could adapt within a lifetime and pass that wisdom to its kin. The connection between fire and memory deepened as early hominids, millions of years later, began to manipulate flame deliberately. What had once been a natural force of renewal became an extension of thought itself. It expanded the hours of life into the night, extending the reach of consciousness beyond daylight. Around it, stories began simple, rhythmic recollections of hunts, migrations, and dreams. Its light danced on the faces of those who remembered and those who listened. The fire spoke in patterns, its crackle echoing the rhythm of ancient tides and heartbeat alike. In its glow, stories and memory became one warmth given form, knowledge given voice. The glow revealed a truth evolution had long been preparing. Survival was no longer just a matter of adaptation, but of understanding. Life had begun to hold a mirror to itself, to recognize its own continuity. In that flicker of flame and thought, the world entered a new kind of dawn. Memory gave shape to identity, and identity gave rise to imagination. From creatures who once crept beneath the feet of giants came a lineage capable of envisioning worlds beyond their own. The planet that had burned, drowned, and rebuilt itself now hosted a species that would one day hold both the power to destroy and the desire to remember. Through the long night, the fire kept burning, steady and alive. Around it, memory waited not only as recollection, but as promise. The world had learned to think, and in doing so, it had awakened the spark that would one day name the stars. Lost civilizations of stone and time, when fire gave light to thought, humanity began to shape the world around it. Stone became its language, and time became its witness. Across plains and valleys, along the banks of rivers that carved the earth, early builders raised monuments not to gods they could see, but to the mysteries they could not name. The first walls stood as memories of order in a world still half wild, tracing the edges of what it meant to belong to a place. Each stone was more than a tool, it was an idea made solid. In the quiet rhythm of stacking and carving, humanity found a way to speak without words. From Göbekli Tepe to the shadowed ruins of forgotten settlements, these early sanctuaries were not cities as we know them, but thresholds between the human and the eternal. Every pillar, every groove was a conversation with time itself, asking the same question that fire once had: what are we becoming? The landscape changed. Forests thinned into fields, rivers became roots, settlements grew, guided by memory and the promise of continuity. Where once the night silence echoed with fear, now it hummed with creation, with hammers striking stone, with fires burning in hearths, with the murmurs of stories passed from mouth to mouth. Civilization, in its earliest form, was not yet a monument to power, but to remembrance. Over generations, memory found structure. Firelight rituals evolved into architecture. The first cities rose, walled and complex, their designs mirroring the order of the cosmos. The builders of Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley did not merely dwell upon the land, they aligned themselves with it, mapping the heavens in mud brick and limestone. The earth became a reflection of the sky, and the sky a guide for the earthbound. In their geometry lay belief, in their precision the search for permanence. But permanence was an illusion. Wind, water, and time began their slow reclamation. Empires crumbled as easily as sandstone in the rain. In the ruins of cities once radiant with colour and song, moss crept over altars and statues, turning human pride into soft green silence. Civilization had built to endure, yet endurance belonged to the elements. What remained were fragments, pieces of language, shards of pottery, walls that whispered the outline of lost lives. Still, the stones endured more than mere structure. They carried intention. Even in ruin, they held a kind of heartbeat, a pulse that connected generations long after their creators were gone. To walk among them is to step into an unfinished conversation, one that began when the first hand pressed into wet clay or carved a symbol into rock. Each mark says the same thing. We were here, we mattered. The archaeologist, kneeling beside a fallen column, is a descendant of that same impulse. Their brushes sweep away centuries of dust, not to recover wealth or empire, but to rediscover meaning. Every unearthed tool, every buried mural, speaks of the desire to be remembered, a dialogue between the living and the lost. And in that act of rediscovery, humanity hears its own reflection, that creation is not about immortality, but connection. Perhaps this is why the stones continue to speak to us. Their silence feels familiar, like a language our minds still remember, but our tongues have forgotten. Standing before ruins, modern humanity recognizes itself both fragile and enduring, both the maker and the debris. The myths we tell of lost cities and vanished empires are not laments for the dead, but mirrors held up to the living, reminders that what we build is never just for now, but for the memory of what we wish to be. Civilizations rose and fell like waves, yet each left behind its trace a language of persistence. The memory of fire had become stone, and stone had become time. Through ruin and rediscovery, humanity learned that memory itself is a kind of architecture, one built not of walls, but of stories. And though each civilization fades, its echo shapes the next. From necessity, not abundance, early civilization emerged shaped by the tension between chaos and order. The act of building was a response to impermanence itself. To shape stone was to resist the forgetting that time promised. In each settlement's design lay an attempt to stabilize the unpredictable. Floods, famines, the shifting moods of sky and soil. The first walls were not only defenses against predators, but against oblivion, marking the boundary between the known and the unknowable. In the end, the earth remembers not the kings or the wars, but the attempts, the reaching toward meaning, the shaping of the infinite into form. Stone may crumble, but the idea endures, that to build is to believe in tomorrow. The earth that could have been, the story of our planet, is a series of narrow escapes. Each age of life rose not because it was destined to, but because it happened to survive. The Permian fires, the asteroid that struck the Yucatan, the slow drift of continents that created just the right balance of oceans and oxygen, all these events could have ended differently. Had they done so, the world beneath our feet might bear little resemblance to the one we know. Scientists call it contingency, the delicate interplay of chance and consequence that shapes evolution. It suggests that the Earth we inherited is not inevitable, but the outcome of a billion dice throws across time. The mammals might never have risen, the dinosaurs might still rule, or perhaps life itself might have taken another form entirely. Imagine, for a moment, an Earth where the asteroid missed. The Cretaceous continues. Forests of cycads and ferns stretch across humid plains, and the air hums with reptilian dominance. Raptors evolve keener intelligence, adapting to prey that grows faster and is harder to catch. Over tens of millions of years, cognition deepens, but it is reptilian thought cold, efficient, rooted in survival. Civilization might still have come, but it would have worn scales instead of skin. Or imagine a world where the Permian extinction never happened, where life's first forests were never burned to ash. In that version of history, the oceans remain full of trilobites and ammonites, while the land is dominated by strange, sprawling amphibians and early reptiles. The earth would be greener, more humid, its ecosystems dense and alien. Mammals might never emerge at all. Some scientists suggest that even small cosmic accidents could have rewritten everything. If the moon were slightly smaller, tides would be weaker, and early life might never have made the leap from sea to land. If the Earth's tilt were greater, climate swings could have been too violent for complex life to persist. The conditions for consciousness, for memory, for civilization rest on improbable symmetry. But there are other forms of possibility, the kind born from intelligence itself. What if, in some forgotten epoch, another species reached awareness before us? Not human, but something earlier. Could a lineage of cephalopods or birds have developed symbolic thought, language, and art? If they had, what ruins might they have left buried in sediments now long transformed into stone? Perhaps their traces were erased in one of Earth's endless renewal civilizations swallowed by tectonic time. We tend to believe that intelligence was waiting for us, that humanity was the inevitable outcome of evolution's slow climb. The Earth has experimented endlessly, generating minds of many kinds. The problem-solving octopus, the social dolphin, the crow that shapes tools. Intelligence is not destiny, but adaptation, a fleeting advantage shaped by environment and chance. In another world, another creature might have stared at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. Still, there is a deeper truth in these imagined histories. The Earth has always rebuilt, but never in the same way. The resilience of life lies not in permanence, but in transformation. The world's genius is its ability to begin again to generate new patterns from the ashes of the old. In contemplating these alternate Earths, we glimpse the fragility of our own. The boundary between being and never having been is thin, almost invisible. We live on the knife's edge of cosmic luck, inheritors of a sequence that might easily have failed. The world we know was one among countless possibilities. The asteroid struck, the mammals rose. Consciousness emerged in a species that learned to name the stars. The rest were discarded drafts, erased by time's relentless editing. Somewhere, deep within the planet's ancient memory, lie the echoes of those unwritten worlds, reminders that creation is not a single story, but a vast library of might-have-beens. Had even one chance failed, this Earth might never have endured, yet the improbable became real. The ancient forces that shaped the continents, the oceans, and the pulse of life conspired to make a world where reflection itself was possible. Perhaps that is the planet's greatest creation, the awareness to wonder not only what has been, but what could have been, the pulse of catastrophe. But the Earth that endured did so not through calm or certainty, but through calamity. Its survival was never linear, never serene. It was forged in chaos, in the shattering rhythm of extinction and renewal. Each epoch, each era, carried within it a pulse of destruction that remade the planet's story. To live here has always meant to adapt to endings. The planet has always breathed in cycles of upheaval. Oceans have risen and vanished. Continents have collided and drifted apart. Volcanic storms once turned skies black for years, smothering light and life alike. Yet, from the ashes of each event, life found its foothold again. What perished became the soil for what would emerge next. Catastrophe, for Earth, has been less an interruption than a heartbeat. In the fossilized reefs of ancient seas and the soot-locked ice of polar cores, that heartbeat can still be traced, a record of death intertwined with renewal. Some of the greatest transformations came silently in the slow violence of time. The Permian extinction, the most severe of them all, unfolded not in a single day, but across millennia. It was a suffocation, a steady erasure. Gases poisoned the seas, temperatures soared, and the majority of life faded into memory. Still, a few survivors clung to existence, bearing within their fragile bodies the future of ecosystems not yet imagined. Others came with terrifying speed, like the Cretaceous Paleogene impact that shattered the age of giants in an instant. Fire rained from the heavens, and the world dimmed beneath a veil of dust. Yet, even in that darkness, evolution stirred. Mammals, once small and unassuming, emerged from burrows and shadows to inherit a broken world. The catastrophe that ended one story became the beginning of another. Scientists can read these cataclysms in the rock-thin layers of iridium, traces of soot, sudden gaps in the fossil record. Each mark is a signature of crisis, a geological scar that tells of Earth's convulsions. But within these same records lie patterns, recoveries that followed devastation, blooms that followed silence. The pulse is irregular but constant. Every collapse has been followed by creation. In this pattern, there is an unsettling truth. Catastrophe has been both destroyer and designer. Without it, the planet might have remained simple, static, and unchanging. The rise of complexity, of forests, wings, mines, was born from instability. The forces that threaten life also make it evolve. Catastrophe, in a paradoxical way, ensures continuity through transformation. Each disaster, however merciless, has been a silent architect clearing space for new anatomies, new instincts, new ways for life to imagine itself. Consider the volcanic winters that once dimmed the Pleistocene Sunday. Humanity's ancestors faced the chill with ingenuity, building fire, clothing, and community. Where other species vanished, humans adapted. Their survival was not luck, but a testament to an ancient resilience written deep within the Earth's memory. Every ember lit in that darkness was an answer to catastrophe's call. The pulse has never stopped, but moves now beneath our feet, in shifting tectonic plates and melting permafrost. It hums in hurricanes, in fires that race across continents, in seas that rise with unseen momentum. The agents have changed, but the pattern remains. The Earth continues to test its inhabitants, and we continue to redefine what it means to endure. And perhaps that endurance carries a question: whether intelligence can learn to live with the pulse instead of against it. We have become the first species capable of perceiving the rhythm, of knowing that catastrophe is not random but recurrent. With that knowledge comes responsibility. To preserve the fragile equilibrium we inherited from all that came before. The story of life on Earth is ultimately a story of persistence through turmoil. Every extinction left behind a whisper of survival. Every upheaval carved a new possibility. To understand this world is to accept that beauty was born from violence, and that existence itself is the echo of countless endings. Under layers of earth and time, the pulse still beats, and sometimes faint, sometimes fierce, but always there, beneath the soil, beneath the noise of our own making. It reminds us that we are part of an unfinished pattern, living within a planet that survives by transformation. And somewhere in that rhythm, amid destruction and renewal, lies the quiet continuity of life enduring, reshaping, beginning again. The memory in the stones. The world remembers, though not in words. Its language is older, spoken in the compression of sediment, in the quiet layering of dust and mineral. Each grain carries a story not of kings or empires, but of rivers that shifted course, of forests that fell to ash, of oceans that once reached where deserts now stand. The earth has written its autobiography in stone, and though the script is slow, it is unbroken. Through ash, ice, and stone, the earth remembered each layer a record of catastrophe and survival. Layers of rock became pages, the fossils within them their characters. Shells pressed into limestone, pollen sealed in clay, the faint imprint of a fern upon shale, all of it an archive of persistence. Beneath the surface, time compresses everything. Heat and pressure reshape the buried past into metamorphic stories: sandstone into quartzite, organic matter into coal, memory into permanence. The stones beneath our feet are not inert. They are repositories of change, transformed by every tremor and tide that has passed before. Geologists read this language with the patience of translators. To them, the Earth is a vast palimpsest, each layer recording a world that once was. They find the black lines of volcanic winters, the thin traces of iridium from cosmic impacts, and the sudden absences, those long silences where extinction left blank pages in the record. Each discovery reveals a new truth, that the planet does not forget. It merely waits to be read. There are places where this memory lies exposed, where time itself has been peeled open. In the cliffs of Dorset, in the red canyons of Utah, in the marble hearts of the Himalayas, the past rises into view. Coral reefs hardened into mountain faces, their curves frozen in stone. To look upon them is to see the anatomy of deep time, the slow architecture of endurance revealed. But the memory is imperfect, since much of what once lived is lost forever, recycled into new stone, erased by erosion or swallowed by the planet's restless interior. The Earth, like us, forgets what it cannot hold. Its record is marked by absence, as much as by preservation, a pattern of remembering and letting go. What remains becomes all the more precious. The scattered traces that survived, chance, pressure, and fire. Amid all that has vanished, there is a strange intimacy in what endures. Fossils do not merely show the shape of the past. They reveal the tenderness of touch, the curve of a leaf pressed into mud, the delicate bones of a hatchling sealed by silt. Each impression is a moment stilled in eternity, where time's violence briefly became gentle. In those forms, we glimpse not just survival, but the fleeting grace of existence itself. Even in the rocks of human history, memory persists. Obsidian blades, carved stones, walls of megaliths, they extend the Earth's archive into the age of awareness. What once recorded the evolution of life now carries the imprint of thought. Our own creations, buried and broken, are already entering the geology of the future. One day, distant minds may read our layer as we read the strata of the past, a faint reminder that intelligence too becomes sediment. In this way, the story of the Earth is continuous, even when its characters change. The planet holds no allegiance to species or eras. What endures is the process, the ceaseless transformation of living into lasting. Each catastrophe, each resurgence, each epoch of light and dark finds its final form in stone. The Earth's memory is not fragile, it is carved into its very bones. To touch such a stone is to touch time itself. The ridges beneath your hand are the echoes of vanished worlds. The pulse of creation turns solid. Every grain of sand, every flake of shale, is a fragment of something that once breathed, burned, or bloomed. Through them, the planet whispers its story not as a warning, but as a remembrance of what endurance truly means. Memory itself belongs to the Earth, enduring beyond the fall of voices and stone. Its memory does not age or tire. It turns catastrophe into continuity, transience into testament. The stones do not mourn what has been lost. They hold it quietly, faithfully, until the next chapter of the world begins. For the Earth, memory is never a burden. It is the way it continues to live. Rebirth. The long now. The silence that lingered in the stones begins to stir. Heat seeps through the fractures of the Earth, a quiet pulse beneath the stillness. What was once inert begins to shift. Beneath miles of buried memory, minerals flow, gases rise, and the old world exhales. The memory of cataclysm softens into rhythm. The planet, long patient, begins its slow renewal. Moisture gathers in hollows where the wind once screamed. Droplets form and fall, tracing paths across ancient dust. Rivers awaken from absence, weaving through valleys carved by extinction. With each flow, They gather the remnants of eras, fragments of shells, flecks of iron, shards of forgotten continents, and carry them into new basins. Life does not yet stir, but the conditions of life begin to return. In these infant rivers, minerals dissolve and mingle, forming chemical gradients that will later serve as the silent blueprints for biological complexity. From this quiet regeneration comes a different kind of movement, the motion of stability reasserting itself. The skies are clear, not suddenly, but through centuries of settling. Carbon finds its balance again. Oceans turn less acidic, the air less harsh. The elements, once chaotic, begin to collaborate. The planet becomes its own architect once more, rebuilding the stage upon which existence might again take shape. In this equilibrium, time stretches. It no longer measures events in moments but in millennia. The long now begins a span so vast that motion itself feels like meditation. Continents drift like slow thoughts, merging and parting in cycles that only the planet remembers. Mountain ranges rise where seabeds once lay, carrying within their roots the imprints of vanished species. The earth, in its own language, composes again. Light returns as a sculptor. It polishes the edges of new rock and warms the shallow waters that gather in the planet's wounds. The sun, steady and indifferent, becomes the silent partner in rebirth. Its energy seeps into chemical soups, awakening molecules to curiosity. From chaos comes pattern from pattern, the faint signature of intention. Each repetition strengthens the bond between matter and motion, weaving a continuity that hints at metabolism before life itself can claim the name. Here, chemistry becomes a possibility. Carbon dances with oxygen, nitrogen with hydrogen, in a choreography that hints at purpose. The oceans, vast laboratories of chance, shimmer with invisible beginnings. The planet, once defined by ruin, now hums with quiet anticipation. It is not yet life, but the idea of life, suspended in water and heat. Over epochs, the improbable becomes inevitable. Self-replicating structures emerge from the random noise of reactions. The first fragile walls form, encasing memory in motion. These are not creatures, not yet, but precursors, experiments conducted by time itself. Within them, energy begins to move in circles, seeking balance. The spark that will one day breathe through forests and oceans is born in silence here. With the return of pattern comes the return of story. The earth once again becomes a canvas for continuity. Currents distribute warmth, winds sculpt the atmosphere, and tectonic drift redraws the map of possibility. The same planet that bore devastation now becomes a cradle. It remembers the cost of imbalance, and in its renewal, it learns rhythm. Yet this rebirth is not a sudden triumph. It is patience incarnate, a lesson written in stone and water. For every surge of creation, there is erosion. For every rise, a quiet fall. The long now is not about progress, but persistence. It is about the refusal of the universe to remain still, the insistence that memory and motion coexist. In this expanse of deep time, every grain of sand holds a past and a promise. The world does not seek to restore what was lost, only to continue becoming. Its rebirth is not a return, but a transformation, an act of remembering forward. The earth that emerges here is both ancient and new, forged from catastrophe, yet tender with possibility. When we imagine the beginning of life, we often think of an instant, but the truth is slower, more patient. The long now unfolds not in flashes, but in tides. The stones that once held silence now cradle the echoes of warmth. The memory of destruction becomes the seed of creation. And in that balance, the planet's story, our story, begins again. Beneath the quiet crust of our world lie the echoes of countless beginnings, civilizations, and species erased, reborn, and erased again. Each epoch leaves a faint signature, a whisper in stone, a tremor in memory. Perhaps Earth itself is the storyteller, always rewriting, always dreaming anew. And in listening to these ancient silences, we glimpse our own impermanence and the beauty of starting over. If you enjoy exploring Earth's forgotten worlds, subscribe for more journeys into deep time.